Hello and welcome to this edition of the Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful podcast. This is a special episode as part of our Future, Our Voice NI campaign, leading the conversation for COP26. This week, we're going to be looking at public transport and how this can help us fight climate change. And we have got probably the best mind in Northern Ireland to talk about this with us, none other than the Chief Executive of Translink, Mr. Chris Conway. Chris, you're very welcome to this podcast.
Thank you, David. Pleased to be here.
Chris, first question is, how is public transport operating in the pandemic? Obviously, you guys have had a lot of challenges since March 2020 in terms of adapting and also managing that situation. So how has public transport been operating over the last 18, 19 months?
Well, it has been a very challenging time for everyone, really, but certainly in terms of what we do with public transport. I think initially it was very much about keeping the service maintained and running for essential workers and for key workers, making sure we kept the essential parts of the economy running, be that the retail environment or getting health workers to hospitals and things like that. And obviously our priority in all of that was safety. And we put a huge amount of measures in place and, wearing face coverings, obviously hand sanitizing all the surfaces on our stations and in our vehicles, putting up perspex screens, social distancing, all of those things were put in place to keep staff and to keep anyone who needed to use public transport safe. As we're starting to emerge now from COVID-19, and we're still doing all of those things, and still very important to keep everyone safe. But we're then also helping to support the economy getting back on its feet again, helping people who maybe have had a very lonely existence the last 18 months get back out into the community and meet with people. And all those things are very important, for people using public transport.
Yeah. And have you found with obviously during the pandemic, when obviously our natural inclination is to bring people together. I mean, you've touched on something very important there. I mean, public transport, obviously key for older people getting around, but also in terms of kind of younger people as well. I mean, have you found that as people get back to kind of some kind of normality, have you found a bit more appreciation of kind of the service that is provided and a bit more appreciation of the fact that of having good bus services, good railway connections?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're seeing a lot of change in people's behaviour about how they use public transport. So, the commute is still slowly coming back, but it's still very slowly. People are using public transport a lot more for socialising. They're looking now for later evening services. We have a lot of activities going on, a lot of concerts and sporting activities, and people are using it a lot more for those types of things as well, going to the beach during the good weather earlier in the summer. So, we're seeing that people's demands on public transport are different. We're trying to respond to that as people get back. And then, of course, just this week, universities going back this week. A lot of young people will use public transport to get to college and universities. Schools were back a few weeks ago as well. So, a lot to take in, and a lot for us to try and see how we might change things going forward.
Okay, and obviously climate change is obviously big focus at the minute as we in the lead up to COP26. With public transport, I mean, why do you feel that public transport is so important in our fight against climate change and the climate emergency?
Well, transport is one of the biggest carbon emitters that we have, particularly in Northern Ireland. It's the second biggest carbon emitter behind agriculture. Over 20% of our carbon emissions in Northern Ireland come from transport, and most of those come from the private car. We still 70% of our journeys are still taken by private car, and it's just so important that we start addressing that. And yes, of course, there will be technologies which will help us with that. We're moving to zero emission vehicles, for example, but we also, that's not going to be a solution in itself. We also need to move to sustainable transport options, public transport, to active travel, and we need towns and cities to start thinking about zero emission zones and how we actually encourage more people onto public transport. I mean, in a way, we're sort of turning the clock back a little bit. I mean, people used to use mass transport was really the main mode of transport for most people, going back a few decades, and we really need to see that starting to return again. And even how we lay out our cities and lay out our residential areas, needs to take account more of public transport and more mode to that. So I think this is a really, the climate crisis is, a defining moment for us right now, and it's really urgent that we start taking action. It's, we don't need to wait for technological solutions. In some cases, people can just take the bus a couple of times a week, use your bike now and again. It doesn't have to be every day. Simple things can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, I think it was yourselves a few years ago, you did that experiment kind of on Oxford Street where you did the amount of cars vis-a-vis a bus or something like that, and
Yeah.
how much that takes off the street. And it is absolutely incredible when, if you look out or you walk around city centre and you see these queues of cars that are just waiting to go nowhere, and and you see people kind of gliding past on the train, who are moving,
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly we've seen that with projects like Glider and some of the bus lanes that we've put in on the motorways even, and then obviously with rail as well, that you can bypass all the traffic congestion and use the road a lot better and more efficiently.
And obviously, another thing, because we're talking about kind of some of the new technologies that are out there now. I know Translink have just recently taken on some hydrogen buses. An order of them have just come online. How important are they for Translink's future? And in terms of, I was actually a few weeks ago on one of your hydrogen buses in Belfast, and they're very quiet. It was and very, 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 very comfortable. But how important are they for your future?
Yeah, they are, and it's good to hear you using the bus when you're out and about, David. So that's good to see. Look, we've got 3 buses which we ordered originally, hydrogen buses, through the Office of Low Emission Vehicle Funding, and we've now progressed to an order for 100 buses. So that now 20 of those will be hydrogen and 80 will be battery electric. They're in production at the minute, and we'll see those going. The first one of those will start arriving over the next month or so, and we'll roll those out over the next 12 months, and that will make Northern Ireland, the 4th largest region in the UK in terms of zero emission public transport. And these technologies are vital. Battery electric has a big role to play, particularly in urban areas. But whenever we go into longer distances and heavier vehicles like coaches, for example, I think hydrogen will play a really important role there, and that's why we're keen to pilot these technologies now. More support will be needed from government because these are expensive technologies right now, but we're keen to pilot them. And as I say, we've got 3 out in the roads now, and then we've a further 20 coming for hydrogen. And even just storing hydrogen and, all of that, it becomes much easier as we go forward. And, the UK particularly can play a big role in the hydrogen technology by investing in it now. I don't think battery technology on its own will be enough. I think we'll need hydrogen technology too.
Okay, so I mean, and that's obviously going to be a big part of it. Another thing that again, particularly in Belfast, that is absolutely a big issue. Anyone who's talking about public transport, and I'm sure you must get the ear talked off you about it. The glider. The glider is something that is big, and again, something close to my heart. It's. I live in the north of the city, so we'd very much like to see it up there. Just before we get to the proposed expansion. The glider recently just celebrated, I think, its 3rd anniversary of coming online in Belfast. How has the east-west route been progressing, and what have you? Are you happy with the take up and the public response to it?
Look, a glider phase 1, was a tremendous success. As you said, traveling from east to west, and in a way, all transport projects are really transport-led regeneration projects, and it's the regeneration effect that has on the areas that it connects. And we saw about 45,000 additional passenger journeys a week, straight after the glider phase 1 was implemented, and up until COVID, we were seeing those numbers continue to increase. In fact, we bought 3 additional vehicles since we launched Glider in 2018. And that just shows, the success of it. And that's about a 30% increase in usage of public transport on those corridors that it travels on. So it's very evident. And, people will say to me, even politicians say it's one of the most successful infrastructure projects that they've ever seen implemented. And another key part, and we talked earlier about connecting communities, it connects east and west. So there are people who now go from the east of the city to the west of the city, and from the west of the city to go and have a coffee or to visit a shop or the hospital. People in the east can go to the Royal Hospital, and vice versa can go to Donald Hospital. So it's opened up so many possibilities, and it has connected communities who maybe would never have been connected in that way before. And that's why it's so important that we continue the development of Glider. And if I had my way, we would launch phase 2 a week after phase 1, but we've taken us a couple of years to get the consultation started. Really pleased that we have the consultation out there. And I think now that people know what Glider can do, rather than in the past, there was a bit of hesitancy about, well, do we really need Glider? Now it's more about, I want it in my area. Can we have it in my area? So as you know, in the north of the city, there's 2 potential routes, and both communities would really like it to go there. I think whichever route we choose, the other route we will still treat, very well with zero emission buses and bus infrastructure as well. And in the south of the city as well, the Ormer Road out towards Kernsall Park and Ride, I think is a really good solution to a really busy route, which we hope will be able to take a lot of cars off that route. But as well as that, they're busy residential areas, lots of businesses in those areas too. Mm-hmm. And we'll be able to connect those communities a lot better than they have been able to be connected in the past. And I think along with our deployment of zero emission buses as well, along with Glider, I think will give a really tremendous public transport offering to people in Belfast, but also right across Northern Ireland. We have lots of other projects underway for connecting interurban connections, and our new Belfast Transport Hub as well, which will connect both by rail and bus, all parts of Northern Ireland too.
Yeah, and ultimately, I mean, is that so? Is that the grand vision then? So obviously, you have all these gliders strumming along, obviously the Greater Belfast area, but then also zero emissions buses taking up the load in other bits as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We know the first areas like, for example, Craigie Road and Castlereagh Road and Hollywood Road, we're looking at zero emission. We're also looking at Lisburn Road and places like that as well. So yeah, definitely we will be looking at zero emission technology taking up the rest of the load, and also then connecting cities across Northern Ireland. And of course, we're looking at a zero emission fleet for Derry, Londonderry as well.
Okay, so if anything, I mean, the momentum behind this is it seems to be expanding. I mean, I take it you're not really foreseeing any kind of what's the word I'm looking for here? Yeah, I take it the momentum on this is only going one way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, one of the complications with starting the journey for zero emission is the infrastructure you need. So you need charging infrastructure, you need hydrogen fueling infrastructure. But once you start rolling that out, you get to a critical mass whereby you can add additional vehicles onto the infrastructure you've already got. So once we start spending the money on the infrastructure, then we will start seeing further and further buses. We have a fleet of about 1,400 buses, so I would see us adding about 100 buses a year to our fleet. So it'll take us a decade to do it, but still that'll bring us to 2030, well ahead of the sort of 2050 target for buses. And then obviously we're looking at our rail technologies as well, looking at the potential for electrification of our rail network too. So we certainly have started the journey now, and we will need support from government in terms of investment, and that's something we hope would be further reinforced via COP26. But we're certainly, we're creating a momentum now, which we think will continue for the next decade. Fantastic.
So it'll be crossing out. Now, another big part of the piece that we're focusing on, because obviously that old saying, if you want to get someone into a good habit, you start them young. How do you think we can get? I mean, I know plenty of young people use transport as it is. As we were talking earlier about going to school, obviously, and going to college. How do you think we can get more to use public transport?
Well, I think it is our biggest demographic using public transport is young people, and we need to keep people, from 16 to 23 on public transport, because we have a half fare for young people up to 16, and then just as they're starting to think about, driving licenses and things like that, we chase them off public transport by increasing the fares. Now, that's I say that a bit tongue in cheek, because we do have a Y-Link card, which gives young people a third off their public transport from the age of 16 to 23. So that really is really helpful. But I would like to see the half fare concession continued until people are 23, and I think that would greatly help people continue to use public transport. We obviously are rolling out a number of new services to help people. So, for example, we have our Unilink service, which connects Queen's and Ulster University, and we'll be enhancing that and probably putting zero emission vehicles onto it as well, and looking even at the type of buses that we put onto it, and how the buses are laid out internally as well, so that it's attractive for young people to use. And that'll be a great opportunity. And obviously then Glider will come along at a later point and help again to connect the two campuses. Encouraging, employers, as people are, leaving university and starting work, employers helping young people to use public transport as a preferred route. Employers are thinking about their corporate social responsibility and what they need to do for the environment. And that's a good way to, keep people on it. So it's really about, at age 16, keeping them on public transport, and then as they transition from university into work, keeping them on public transport again. Private cars are expensive now for young people. Doing your tests are expensive. Getting insurance is expensive. And as we move away from, we move to zero emission zones in cities, there'll be less car parking availability. And I think all of those things are good ways just to encourage people to stick with public transport and to help us develop the services as well. Because sometimes, we need, young people on and then getting feedback. We have a Translink Youth Forum, and we try to use it to get feedback from young people as to what we can do better. Because it's not just about connecting the cities, it's also about interurban connections as well. So how would someone from a rural area get into Belfast in the first place? Because sometimes they bring their car in and then they might as well use it when they're traveling across the cities. So it's about saying how do we make that more accessible to people as well.
Okay. And obviously, a big part of what you were saying there about maybe extending those fares and things like that. What could be done to help you do that? I mean, what could we see to help you achieve that target?
Well, that is that concessionary funding is a government decision, so that has to come from the executive. And I think again, thinking about COP26 and thinking about what we need to do for the environment, it would be a big, strong message from government to say, that we want to keep people on public transport and to extend that concessionary fare scheme for young people. I think that will be very beneficial.
Okay, fantastic. That leads very nicely on to my next question. COP26, obviously, coming up very soon. It's just around the corner. We've already talked about some things that policymakers could do, but is there anything that you want to see from this conference? I mean, what do you want to be seeing from the headlines after the conference, and what are the conversations you'll be looking to be having in November and going forward?
Well, I mean, it's clear that this is a defining moment for us. I think one thing that COVID-19 has taught everyone is that, these emergencies are real. And we've got to, as a society, take action early enough to address them. And we can already see some of the fires and the droughts and different things that are happening across the world as clear evidence of climate change. And we're even seeing it ourselves, even locally, not to the same extent, but we're starting to see some evidence of it. So I think this COP26, this year has to be really a defining moment. We know that a lot of the agreements from Paris haven't been accelerating fast enough. And we need to accelerate some of those agreements that were already made at Paris. We talk about 2050, my view, it's as soon as possible. We shouldn't be setting targets so far out that people think they can forget about them. I think we need some targets which talk about, well, this is what we're going to do by 2025. This is what we're going to do by 2026 and 2027. We need targets closer in. On transport specifically, I think the technologies, electric technologies and hydrogen technologies are starting to come through, but they still need government support. They're still quite expensive. And I think if we're really serious about, 2030 and 2035, no new cars being developed that are, through petrol or diesel, but all electric technologies, then the government needs put more support into that to really make it happen. Mm-hmm. I would like to see targets for cities to move to zero emission zones. So again, these are things that can be done quickly. We keep focused sometimes on the complicated things, but these are things, cities could put together zero emission zones in their cities, between now and 2025, for example, and that be a great way to get car parking and things like that out of our cities and change how we're doing things. And I think, there could be lots of incentives that governments can do, again, not that expensive, to encourage people to use public transport, sustainable transport. So, for example, there used to be tax incentives for someone to use public transport, and you would do it as a benefit in kind. I would like to see government starting to move towards, initiatives like that to encourage more people to use sustainable and public transport. So these are shorter term things that can be done in the next 5 years. Yes, the big longer term targets still need to be out there around energy and renewable energy and those initiatives, but there are other things that we can sooner in, and I would like to see COP26 focus on some of those closer in actions that can be taken right now and start getting people's behaviour change to start to happen.
Yeah, Chris, and this will be my final question to you. And you've just mentioned keywords there, behaviour change, and it sounds like, from what we've just talked, Translink are up for this. Translink are up for changing the way, you guys are already taking steps to change some of the ways in which public transport is delivered. You're up for these conversations and actually and the actions that are required from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, one of the big moments for behavior change is when people are making other changes in their lives. So we always find that, when someone is maybe, getting their new job and it's maybe further away from where they were and they're thinking about, well, how am I going to travel there? That's a key opportunity. If you can get to the person at that point in time and talk to them, then you can hope sometimes affect behavior change. When they're having their family and they're thinking about going to school, is that, a time for people to think about, well, how are my kids going to get to school? If they're moving house, where am I going to live? What's the transport like? These are all defining moments when people think about maybe changing their behavior. And I think coming out of COVID-19 is a key moment for us, because people have been working from home, and people are thinking about, well, how am I going to get to work? Am I just going to jump in that car in my drive again? Or perhaps I can, if I'm only working maybe 2 to 3 days a week, can I just use public transport those 2 or 3 days a week? Do I really need the car? Or do I reduce to one car in the household and then use public transport the other journeys? So I think there's an opportunity with both COP26 and COVID-19 for people to think about things differently as we emerge from COVID-19. And I think transport's one of those areas where it's very easy to do. I mean, I would even say to people, just take one day a week and use the bus or use the train, or cycle, if that's more convenient for you. Or cycle to the park and ride and use the bus, and mix up the transport journeys. So, I think, just one, if everybody did that, we'd double the number of people using public transport. If just everybody in Northern Ireland took one journey a week that they don't currently use on public transport, that would double their usage in public transport straight away. So it's simple changes. And maybe that, one simple change can lead to another one, and then, you gradually build up over time. So I do think we're certainly trying to get ourselves ready for that, and trying to encourage people to think about transport differently.
Okay, sounds like a lot going on in public transport in Northern Ireland, which is fantastic to see. It's what we want to hear, and lots of new innovations. Chris Conway, Chief Executive of Translink, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for listening to the Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful podcast. Please make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can be reminded of future episodes.